Leah Carter sat at her desk, fingers flying across the keyboard as she made last-minute adjustments to the proposal. The numbers had to be perfect, the projections airtight. It was the final phase of a multi-million-dollar deal with Vanguard Industries, a deal she had been meticulously crafting for 4 relentless months. Late nights, early mornings, weekends lost to conference calls, it had all led to this. She exhaled, tapping the final figures into place before hitting send. The weight of exhaustion pressed on her shoulders, but there was an underlying thrill too. If this went through, if everything landed as she planned, it would be a massive win, not just for the firm, but for her. Leah knew she was the one who had done the heavy lifting. Daniel Crowe, her boss, had barely skimmed through her work before taking credit in front of the higher-ups. But that was fine. She had learned to play the game, to be patient. Her phone buzzed, yanking her from her thoughts. An email from Vanguard Industries. Leah's heart skipped as she clicked it open. From Henry Lawson, Vanguard Industries. Subject: Thank you. Leah. I just wanted to personally thank you for your incredible work. This deal wouldn't have happened without your dedication and attention to detail. You went above and beyond, and it didn't go unnoticed. As a small token of our appreciation, we're sending you 2 VIP tickets to the Super Bowl, front row, 50-yard line. You earned it. Thanks again. Henry Lawson. Leah's hands tightened around her phone. For a moment, she just stared, processing what she had just read. VIP Super Bowl tickets. The kind of seats money alone couldn't buy. A reward, a real recognition of everything she had poured into this deal. She exhaled, a slow smile stretching across her lips. This was it. Finally, something tangible. Something that proved her work mattered. She could already imagine the energy of the stadium, the deafening roar of the crowd, the pure exhilaration of watching the biggest game of the year from the best seats in the house. She stood up, her pulse quickening with excitement. The tickets would be coming through the company, but she had no doubt they'd be handed to her soon. Henry Lawson had made it clear this was for her. She had earned it. Leah spent the rest of the day on a high, powering through the last of her tasks with a new sense of momentum. Every few hours, she checked her inbox, half expecting an email from HR or Daniel Crowe confirming when she could pick up her tickets. But nothing came. The next day, nothing. By Friday, the excitement had shifted into mild concern. Leah stopped by Daniel's office, a casual approach. He was on the phone, leaned back in his chair, looking as self-satisfied as ever. He caught sight of her, raised a finger signaling her to wait, and continued talking. Yeah, don't worry about it. We've got the best seats in the house. Front row, 50-yard line. Gonna be incredible. He chuckled. Gotta make the right connections, you know how it is. Leah's breath caught. Her fingers curled into her palm. No, it couldn't be. He ended the call and finally looked up at her. Leah, what do you need? She kept her expression neutral, even as a storm brewed inside her. I was just checking in about the tickets from Vanguard. Henry mentioned they'd be sent over. Daniel's lips curled into something that was supposed to resemble a smile, but to Leah, it felt more like a smirk. Right. The tickets. He leaned back, drumming his fingers against his desk. Yeah, those were sent over to the firm. Big opportunity, high-profile event. We decided they'd be best used for strategic networking. Leah blinked. Networking? Exactly. Taking a potential investor. These things aren't just for fun, you know, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Gotta think long-term. Build relationships. Her heart pounded in her ears. But Henry Lawson sent them to me. Daniel scoffed. It was a misunderstanding. They were sent to the company. And the company decided the best way to use them. Nothing personal. Leah felt her nails dig into her palm. Nothing personal? She had sacrificed everything for this deal, worked until her eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, until her voice went hoarse from late-night calls. And now, when she was finally given something in return, Daniel had snatched it away without a second thought. Look, he said, pushing back from his desk and standing up. You should be grateful you even have a job. That's the real reward here. Leah inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay still. He was watching her, waiting for a reaction, expecting her to back down. So she smiled. Not a genuine one, not this time. It was a controlled, measured expression, the kind she had perfected over years of working under people like him. She nodded as if she understood, as if she accepted his reasoning. "Of course," she said, her voice even. "I appreciate the clarification." Daniel grinned. "Good. That's the attitude." He patted her on the shoulder like she was some intern who needed a pep talk. "Now, back to work." Leah turned and walked out of his office, her heart hammering. But not with anger. Not anymore. No, this was something else. Something colder. Something sharper. She had played fair. She had done everything right. And still, Daniel had taken what was hers without a second thought. Fine. If that was the game he wanted to play, then she would play too. Only this time, she wouldn't be the one walking away empty-handed. Leah Carter sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, but her mind wasn't processing the words on the report in front of her. The words blurred, the numbers meaningless. All she could hear was Daniel Crow's voice echoing in her head. "You should be grateful you even have a job. That's the real reward here." Grateful? Grateful for what? For working herself to exhaustion? For sacrificing her personal time, her weekends, her sanity just to land the biggest deal of her career? She had played by the rules, done everything right, and in return, her boss had stolen from her. The anger burned in her chest like a slow, simmering fire. She had never been naive enough to believe that corporate life was fair, but this was blatant. He had looked her in the eye, taken something that belonged to her, and expected her to accept it with a smile. She forced herself to take a deep breath. Reacting emotionally wouldn't get her anywhere. She knew better than to throw a fit or storm into his office demanding what was hers. That would be exactly what Daniel expected, what he wanted. For her to lash out, to get labeled as difficult, emotional, and ungrateful. No, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she straightened in her chair, smoothed her hands over her desk, and forced a pleasant expression onto her face. She had already made her decision. If Daniel wanted to play dirty, so be it. But he had severely underestimated her. Leah didn't just accept setbacks, she adapted, she learned, and she waited for the perfect moment to strike back. The first step? Playing the role. When Daniel waltzed into her office an hour later, radiating smug arrogance, she met him with a calm, professional nod. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, exuding the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. "I trust there are no hard feelings," he asked, his tone patronizing. Leah smiled. Of course not. It was a misunderstanding, after all. Daniel looked at her for a moment, as if gauging whether she was being sincere. She kept her face neutral, her tone light, her posture relaxed. He grinned, clearly satisfied with himself. "Good," he said. "I knew you'd see reason." With that, he strolled off, whistling under his breath. Leah turned back to her computer, her smile fading the moment he was out of sight. She had just given him exactly what he wanted, a woman who knew her place, who wouldn't cause problems. Now, she could do what she needed to do. That evening, she stayed late, using the quiet of the office to think through her next steps. Revenge wasn't just about reacting. It was about being precise, controlled, and making sure the impact was permanent. Daniel had power, but it was built on a foundation of arrogance and assumption. That meant there were cracks. She just needed to find the right one to widen. And then, an idea struck. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. To Henry Lawson. Subject: Thank you. Hi, Henry. I just wanted to personally thank you again for thinking of me when you sent those Super Bowl tickets. It really meant a lot. It's always great to feel recognized for my hard work. Hope all is well. Leah. She hit send and leaned back in her chair. The message was casual, innocent. There was no accusation, no bitterness, just gratitude. But she knew Henry. And she knew exactly how he would react when he realized she never got the tickets. Minutes later, her phone vibrated. A new email. From Henry Lawson. Subject, "Are you kidding me?" Leah. Wait, what? You never got them? Who took them? Her lips curved. She typed back, keeping it simple. Not sure. I just know I never got them. No big deal, though. Henry's response came almost immediately. No big deal? Leah, this is a big deal. Let me handle this. Say nothing. Leah smiled, setting her phone down. The real game had just begun. Leah sat back in her chair, staring at Henry's last message on her phone. Let me handle this. Say nothing. She read the words again, her lips pressing into a thin line. There was no need for her to push further. Henry was already furious. And that was exactly what she had counted on. Still, she played it cool. She wasn't going to rush into anything or tip her hand too early. This had to be done right. Leaning forward, she locked her screen and placed the phone face down on her desk. The office was mostly empty now, just the usual night owls clacking away at their keyboards, but Leah had no interest in small talk. She opened her laptop again, fingers hovering over the keys as she reviewed her next move. The key to any well-laid plan wasn't just the execution, it was patience. Daniel had underestimated her. He assumed she would swallow the loss and move on, maybe grumble about it over drinks with colleagues, but ultimately let it go. That's how the game was played, right? The higher-ups took what they wanted, and the ones who actually did the work were supposed to accept it with a smile. Not this time. Leah let herself relive the moment when Daniel had leaned against her office door, so smug, so sure of himself. The way he had dismissed her, patronizingly assured her that it was just a misunderstanding, that the company knew best. He had thought that was the end of it. But in reality, it had only just begun. She took a breath, glanced at the clock, and then pulled up Vanguard Industries' website. Scrolling through the leadership team, she quickly found Isabel Grant's profile. Vice President of Corporate Relations. Interesting. She didn't need to contact Isabel, not yet at least, but it was good to know exactly who held the cards on the client side. If Henry escalated this, she had a strong feeling Isabel would be involved. Perfect. Leah shut her laptop and gathered her things. It was time to go home. The next morning, she walked into the office just as Daniel was holding court in the break room. A handful of mid-level managers were gathered around, laughing at some story he was telling. Leah didn't stop, didn't even slow down. She simply walked past, straight to her desk, but her ears caught just enough of the conversation. Can't wait for this weekend. Front row seats. Gonna be an incredible game. Taking a high-value investor with me. You know how it is, relationships make the deals. Leah smiled to herself as she slid into her chair. Oh, Daniel. You really can't help yourself, can you? He was bragging. Loudly. Arrogantly. Without the slightest concern that he had done anything wrong. It would be his undoing. She opened her inbox and found a new message from Henry. From Henry Lawson. Subject, handled. Leah, I spoke with the team. This should have never happened. You don't need to do anything, just sit tight. That was all it said, but she could practically hear the anger simmering beneath the words. She sat back, a slow, satisfied exhale leaving her lips. It was out of her hands now. Now, all she had to do was wait. By Friday, Daniel was in rare form. He left early, walking through the office like a king on his way to claim his throne. People smiled, nodded, wished him a good trip. Leah? She just sat at her desk, pretending not to notice. She could feel the storm gathering, even if Daniel was too blind to see it. And that was what made it all the more satisfying. He had no idea that the trap had already been set. Friday afternoon at Sterling and Company was usually a slow, sluggish affair. Most of the executives had long since adopted the practice of cutting their days short, especially when the weekend promised a high-profile event like the Super Bowl. The energy in the office was relaxed, conversations lighter, the tension of the workweek easing away. Leah Carter sat at her desk, fingers scrolling idly through reports she had already checked twice, but her mind wasn't on numbers anymore. It was on Daniel Crowe. She had watched him saunter through the office earlier, all smiles, shaking hands with people who didn't really care where he was going but played along with his self-importance. He had laughed, thrown in some joke about big moves and high-value networking before grabbing his coat and heading out early for his flight. As he walked past her desk, he hadn't even acknowledged her. No smirk, no forced pleasantries. Good. It meant he had completely dismissed her, written her off as just another employee who knew her place. That was his first mistake. Leah kept her face neutral as she watched him disappear into the elevator. The door slid shut, and just like that, Daniel Crowe was off to the Super Bowl, completely unaware that his world was about to crumble. She glanced at her phone. No messages from Henry Lawson. Not yet. That was fine. She wasn't expecting fireworks, at least not today. No, today was just the calm before the storm. She had played her part perfectly. She had said nothing, done nothing, acted as though she had accepted Daniel's theft of her reward without question. And that meant when the hammer finally fell, he would never see it coming. By lunchtime, whispers had started circulating. Someone mentioned seeing Daniel's expense reports on the internal system, flights, hotel, fancy dinners, all tied to this high-value investor he was supposedly taking to the game. Someone else brought up how Daniel had been bragging all week about the trip, name-dropping the Super Bowl like it was his personal playground. Leah sipped her coffee and pretended not to listen. Let them talk. The rumors would spread on their own, little threads unraveling just enough for people to start questioning things. But the real moment, the moment that mattered, would come Monday morning. And Leah would be ready. Saturday and Sunday passed in quiet anticipation. Leah didn't check her email, didn't reach out to Henry or anyone from Vanguard Industries. She didn't need to. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, she knew it was already in motion. Instead, she let herself relax for the first time in weeks. She went for a run, cooked a real meal instead of ordering takeout, and caught up on sleep. Because come Monday morning, she would need to be sharp. And Daniel? Daniel would be walking into a nightmare. Monday morning came crisp and cold, the kind of morning that made people pull their coats tighter and rush into the office with hot coffee clutched between their fingers. Leah Carter stepped through the glass doors of Sterling and Company, the familiar hum of office chatter filling the air. She walked with purpose, steady and unhurried, making her way to her desk. She didn't rush, didn't fidget. There was no need. Because today wasn't just another Monday. Today was the reckoning. As she settled into her chair, she took a slow breath, letting the anticipation simmer beneath the surface. The trap had already been set. All she had to do now was watch it spring shut. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the email arrived. Mandatory meeting, all hands required. It was sent from the executive assistant of their largest client, Vanguard Industries. Leah clicked the invite, reading the details. The meeting would be held in the main conference room, and the attendee list included not only the usual leadership from Sterling and Company, but also a surprise guest, Isabel Grant, the Vice President of Corporate Relations from Vanguard. Leah's lips curled into a smile. Oh, this was going to be good. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her blazer, and made her way toward the conference room. People were already gathering, murmuring among themselves, eyes flickering with curiosity. When she stepped inside, she immediately spotted Daniel Crowe. He was seated at the far end of the table, casually leaned back in his chair, his usual air of smug self-assurance wrapped around him like a shield. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. But Leah knew better. She took her seat, keeping her expression neutral. Around her, other executives whispered quietly, speculation buzzing in the air. No one knew exactly what this meeting was about yet. A moment later, the door opened, and Henry Lawson walked in, his expression unreadable. He wasn't alone. Beside him was Isabel Grant, her presence commanding, her gaze sharp as she surveyed the room. The murmuring died instantly. Daniel straightened, finally realizing that something was off. Henry didn't waste time. He took his seat, folded his hands on the table, and got straight to the point. "Leah," he said, his voice calm but firm, "did you enjoy the game?" Leah met his gaze and tilted her head slightly. The game, she asked, feigning confusion. The Super Bowl, Henry clarified. I arranged for you to have front row seats. The room went silent. Leah held his gaze for a second longer before answering, her tone deliberately measured. Oh, I didn't go. A sharp pause. Daniel's entire body tensed. Henry leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. That's strange, he mused. Because I personally made sure those tickets were sent for you. Leah shrugged, keeping her face neutral. I never received them. The silence was deafening. All eyes turned to Daniel. His face remained carefully blank, but Leah saw the flicker of tension in his jaw, the slight shift in his posture. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he forced a laugh. Well, there must have been some confusion, he said, his voice light but strained. The tickets were sent to the company and we decided. We? Isabel Grant cut in, her voice sharp. Daniel faltered. I mean, the leadership team. Isabel's eyes narrowed. So, you're saying the leadership team was aware that you took corporate gifts meant for an individual employee and repurposed them? Daniel swallowed, his confidence starting to crack. It wasn't like that. It was a business decision. Henry cut him off. That's interesting, he said smoothly. Because the person you took wasn't an investor, Daniel. It was your brother-in-law. A gasp rippled through the room. Leah didn't react. She already knew. But watching Daniel's face drain of color? That was priceless. Daniel's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. He looked around, searching for support, but no one was going to save him. He knew he was trapped. Isabel leaned forward, folding her hands together. Let me be very clear, Daniel, she said, her tone sharp. You took corporate tickets meant for an employee and used them for personal gain. Then, you expensed the entire trip, including flights, hotel, and meals to the firm. Do you deny this? Daniel's hands curled into fists. He was floundering. There was no way out. Finally, he tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. It was a misunderstanding, he said weakly. I thought. Henry cut in one last time, his voice cold. I don't think I can continue working with someone who undermines his own employees. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Daniel's face twisted. Wait. If your firm wants to keep my account, Henry continued, I'd rather deal directly with Leah from now on. A stunned silence filled the room. Leah sat still, calm, collected. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it said aloud was a different kind of satisfaction. Daniel looked like he had been physically struck. His jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if he was trying to hold on to whatever power he had left. But it was gone. And everyone in the room knew it. The firm's managing partners exchanged glances, and one of them, a senior executive, finally spoke. His tone was clipped, businesslike. Daniel, take the rest of the week off. The corporate translation? You're done. Leah didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply sat there as the weight of the moment settled over the room. Daniel had stolen from her. And now he was the one paying the price. Leah Carter remained seated as the meeting room slowly emptied, executives murmuring amongst themselves, the weight of what had just unfolded settling heavily in the air. She kept her expression neutral, though every muscle in her body hummed with restrained satisfaction. Daniel Crow had been crushed under the weight of his own arrogance. The moment he had walked out of the room, shoulders tense, face pale, jaw locked, Leah had known. He was finished. Maybe not officially, not yet, but the writing was on the wall. She took her time gathering her things, deliberately waiting until most of the attendees had left before she finally stood. Leah, a voice called from across the room. She turned to see Henry Lawson approaching, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with something sharper, more serious. Isabel Grant walked beside him, her expression unreadable. Leah straightened, lifting her chin slightly as they approached. You handled that well, Henry said, slipping his hands into his pockets. Leah nodded, choosing her words carefully. I didn't have to handle much, she said. You did that for me. Henry huffed a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I'd like to say I'm surprised by what happened," he said, glancing toward the door Daniel had disappeared through, "but I'm not. People like him always think they're untouchable." Isabel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "What he did wasn't just unethical, it was stupid," she said flatly. "Expensing a personal trip, misappropriating a corporate gift? He either thought no one would notice, or he believed he was above consequences." Leah shrugged slightly. "Probably both." Isabel's lips twitched in something that might have been the ghost of a smirk. "Well," she said, "he was wrong." Henry studied Leah for a long moment before nodding. "You've got a solid head on your shoulders," he said. "That's rare." He hesitated before adding, "You ever think about working somewhere that actually values that?" Leah stilled. She had expected a lot of things from this meeting: Daniel's humiliation, the fallout, the inevitable shifting of power, but she hadn't expected this. Still, she kept her expression neutral. "Are you offering me a job, Henry?" He smiled slightly. "I'm saying if you're interested, we should talk." Leah tilted her head, considering. "I appreciate that," she said. "But let's see how the dust settles first." Henry nodded in understanding. "Fair enough." Isabel gave her one last assessing look before turning to leave. Henry followed, pausing just before the door. "One more thing," he said, glancing back at her. "You earned those tickets." "I'm sorry you didn't get them." Leah smiled, small but genuine. "It worked out." Henry gave her a knowing look before disappearing into the hall. Alone in the empty conference room, Leah finally allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. It had worked out, but she had a feeling this wasn't over just yet. By the time she returned to her desk, the whispers had turned into a full-on buzz. The news was spreading fast. Daniel Crowe had been removed from the Vanguard account, and it wasn't looking good for his future at the firm. Leah ignored the side glances, the hushed conversations that paused whenever she walked by. She had no interest in office gossip. Instead, she focused on her work. The hours passed quickly, and just as she was packing up for the day, her phone buzzed. "Meeting request, Human Resources, 4:30 p.m. Leah raised a brow. Well, that didn't take long. She took a breath, straightened her blazer, and made her way down to HR. Denise Harper, head of Human Resources, sat behind her desk, her hands folded neatly as Leah stepped inside. Across from her, looking tense and furious, was Daniel Crowe. So this was the game he wanted to play. Leah took her seat, her expression carefully neutral. Denise wasted no time. "Daniel has brought forward a concern," she said evenly. "He believes you may have violated corporate confidentiality." Leah didn't react. "Oh," she said smoothly. "And how, exactly, did I do that?" Daniel leaned forward, his fists clenched. "You went behind my back to Vanguard," he snapped. "You manipulated a client into turning against me." Denise held up a hand, cutting him off. "Daniel," she said sharply, "this isn't a courtroom. Stick to the facts." Daniel swallowed hard, visibly struggling to regain control. "She went to Henry Lawson directly," he said, his voice still taut with anger. "She brought an internal matter to an external client." Leah tilted her head. "That's interesting," she said. "Because all I did was thank Henry for thinking of me when he sent the tickets. He's the one who realized I never got them." Denise glanced at her, then back at Daniel. "Is that true?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. Because of course it was true. Leah hadn't complained. She hadn't ranted or accused anyone. She had simply expressed gratitude and let Henry do the rest. Denise leaned back in her chair. "Daniel, this isn't about Leah," she said, her tone sharp. "This is about you." Daniel's jaw clenched. You expensed a personal trip to the company," Denise continued, cutting him off. "You took a corporate gift that wasn't meant for you. And you misrepresented yourself to a major client." She shook her head. "You're lucky this isn't a legal issue." Daniel's face was red now, his breathing uneven. He looked at Leah with nothing but contempt. "She set me up," he hissed. Leah met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Daniel," she said quietly. "You did that to yourself." Denise sighed, clearly having heard enough. Effective immediately, she said, looking at Daniel. Your employment with Sterling and Company is terminated. There it was. The final nail in the coffin. Daniel went still. You can't. This decision is final, Denise said firmly. Your company email will be disabled within the hour. Security will escort you out. Daniel turned to Leah, his eyes burning with hatred. You think you've won? He sneered. Leah simply picked up her bag and stood. I didn't have to win, she said. You lost all on your own. She walked out without looking back. Behind her, she could hear the sound of security arriving. It was over. Daniel Crow was done. Leah Carter sat at her desk, fingers tapping idly against the polished surface as she watched the company-wide email notification pop up in the bottom corner of her screen. Effective immediately, Daniel Crow is no longer with Sterling and Company. The words were simple, direct, but their weight settled heavily over the entire office. The moment she clicked on the email, she could hear the hushed whispers carrying through the cubicles, the sudden surge of Slack messages being exchanged in hushed excitement. It was done. Daniel was out. Leah allowed herself a slow, steady breath, absorbing the finality of it. For months, she had endured his arrogance, his casual dismissal of her work, his belief that power made him untouchable. But now he was gone, escorted out of the building like a common thief. And he had no one to blame but himself. She reached for her coffee, taking a careful sip, watching as employees peeked over their desks, eyes darting toward the elevators as if expecting Daniel to storm back in, demanding an explanation. He wouldn't. Not anymore. The doors to HR had closed behind him for the last time, and his name was already being scrubbed from the company directory. He had tried to fight, tried to pin the blame on her, but it hadn't mattered. Leah hadn't broken any rules. She had simply played the game better than he had. Her inbox chimed again. Another message. From Denise Harper, head of HR. Subject, quick chat? Leah exhaled, pushing back from her desk. She had been expecting this. HR wasn't just cleaning house, they were making sure the fallout didn't spread. She rose, adjusting the hem of her blazer before making her way toward Denise's office. The halls felt different now, lighter somehow. The tension that had been simmering for months suddenly lifted. She knocked once before stepping inside. Denise looked up, gesturing for her to close the door behind her. Take a seat. Leah did, crossing her legs neatly, waiting. Denise leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished desk. I assume you saw the announcement. Leah nodded. Hard to miss. A brief smile flickered across Denise's lips before she turned serious again. You handled yourself well through all of this, she said. That's not always easy, especially when dealing with someone like Daniel. Leah gave a small shrug. I just did what needed to be done. Denise studied her for a moment. That's exactly why I wanted to talk. She exhaled. Look, we both know Daniel made his own bed, but this kind of scandal still shakes things up internally. Some people are worried. Others are reevaluating their own positions. Leah kept her face carefully neutral. She knew what Denise was really saying. People were scrambling. The power vacuum left behind by Daniel's departure had set off a ripple effect. Executives were calculating their next moves, allies were shifting, and the firm's leadership was watching closely. Leah had expected as much. Denise tapped a pen against her desk. There's going to be restructuring in the coming weeks, she said. Promotions. Department shifts. She gave Leah a pointed look. Your name has come up. Leah met her gaze evenly. For what position? Denise hesitated, then sighed. Nothing official yet. But if I were you, I'd stay sharp. Leah nodded once. She had no intention of doing otherwise. Denise leaned back in her chair. If I were you, I'd also avoid celebrating too openly, she added, a knowing glint in her eye. Leah's lips curled slightly. Of course. Denise smirked. Good. Now go back to work before the entire office comes knocking on my door for answers. Leah stood, smoothing her blazer. Thanks for the heads up. She left without another word, her mind already moving several steps ahead. This wasn't just the end of Daniel's reign. It was the beginning of something much bigger. By lunchtime, the office was buzzing. People who had never given her more than a passing nod were suddenly stopping by her desk, asking how she was doing, throwing out casual questions about what had happened. Leah dodged them all with polite, vague answers. She knew the game. They weren't just curious, they were testing the waters, trying to see where she stood now that Daniel was out of the picture. She kept her responses measured, never giving away too much. If they wanted to know how much power she had gained from all of this, they'd have to wait and see. Her phone buzzed just as she was finishing her coffee. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at McAllister's, 6 p.m. Henry." Leah raised an eyebrow. Henry Lawson wasn't the type to waste time. If he wanted a meeting outside the office, it meant he had something big to discuss. She texted back a simple, "See you then." Whatever he had to say, she was ready for it. McAllister's was a quiet, upscale bar on the east side of the city, the kind of place where business deals were whispered over top-shelf whiskey. Leah arrived exactly on time, scanning the room before spotting Henry in a corner booth, a drink already in front of him. She slid into the seat across from him, her expression unreadable. "You're not wasting any time, I see." Henry smirked. "Neither are you." A waitress appeared, and Leah ordered a whiskey neat before turning her attention back to Henry. "So," she said, "what's on your mind?" Henry leaned back, studying her. "You," he said simply. Leah didn't react. She just waited. He took a slow sip of his drink before setting the glass down. "I meant what I said before. You handled yourself well. And now that Daniel's out, there's an opening." Leah arched a brow. "At Sterling?" Henry shook his head. "At Vanguard." She didn't blink. Didn't let her expression betray the flicker of excitement that shot through her. Henry smiled, as if he could see right through her. "I want you on my team, Leah." She tilted her head slightly. "Why?" He chuckled. "Because you don't just work hard, you see things. You know when to push, when to wait. You think strategically." He leaned forward. "And because, let's be honest, you're too damn good to be stuck at Sterling." Leah let the words settle before she finally spoke. "What's the offer?" Henry's smile widened. "Double your current salary. Full control over your own accounts. A direct line to me." Leah exhaled slowly, considering. It was tempting. More than tempting. But she wasn't going to say yes just because the offer was good. She had played this game too long to make a move without considering every angle. She lifted her drink, swirling the amber liquid. "Send me the details," she said finally. "I'll think about it." Henry nodded, pleased. "That's what I expected." He lifted his own glass. "To smart decisions." Leah clinked her glass against his, taking a slow sip. She wasn't just making a decision. She was changing the game. The next morning, Leah Carter walked into Sterling and Company with an entirely new presence. She had always been good at keeping a low profile, at working in the background and letting her results speak for themselves. But now everyone saw her. The whispers hadn't stopped since Daniel Crow had been escorted out of the building. She could feel the energy in the office shifting. Some people were sizing her up, trying to gauge just how much power she had gained from Daniel's downfall. Others were keeping their distance, unsure whether aligning with her would be a smart move or a dangerous one. Leah didn't care. She had bigger things to focus on. As she set her bag down and powered on her computer, her phone buzzed. A message from Henry Lawson. "Sent over the offer. Take your time." She exhaled, opening her email. The subject line was simple. "Formal offer, Vanguard Industries." She clicked on it, scanning the details. Henry hadn't been bluffing. The salary was double what she was making at Sterling. The benefits package was elite, full autonomy over her accounts, a performance-based bonus structure, and direct oversight of some of Vanguard's biggest deals. It was the kind of offer people spent their entire careers chasing. And yet, Leah didn't immediately accept. She leaned back in her chair, considering. The logical move was to say yes. To walk away from Sterling and Company and never look back. But logic wasn't the only factor at play. This wasn't just about a better paycheck. It was about control. about making sure that, wherever she landed, she would never be put in the same position again. She needed to play this smart. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she finally typed a response. Henry, I appreciate the offer. I'd like to discuss a few details before making a decision. Let me know when you're available. She hit send and exhaled. She wouldn't rush this. She had the leverage now, and she intended to use it. By lunchtime, the office was still buzzing. Some of her colleagues were more blatant than others, stopping by her desk with thinly veiled curiosity. So, one of them, Todd from finance, said casually, "Any idea who's taking over Daniel's role?" Leah sipped her coffee. "No clue," she said, keeping her voice light. "I'm sure management has a plan." Todd nodded, watching her carefully. "You'd be a strong candidate." Leah smiled. "Appreciate that." She gave nothing away. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. She had no intention of tipping her hand before it was time. That evening, her phone buzzed again. "Henry, let's meet tomorrow. My office, 10 a.m. Leah smirked. It was time to negotiate. The next morning, she walked into Vanguard Industries with the same confidence she had carried into Sterling. She had been in this office before, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't here as an outsider. She was here as a decision-maker. Henry met her in the lobby, leading her into a sleek, modern conference room. "Leah," he said, shaking her hand. "Glad you came." She sat down, placing her bag neatly beside her chair. "Let's talk." Henry chuckled. "Straight to business." "I like it." He slid a folder across the table. "Everything's in there. But I assume you already looked through the email." Leah nodded. "I did." Henry leaned forward. "What's on your mind?" Leah met his gaze. "The offer is strong," she said. "But I want a seat at the table." Henry tilted his head. "Elaborate." "I don't just want a better paycheck," Leah said. "I want influence. I want decision-making power, not just execution." Henry studied her for a moment before nodding. "You want more than a title." "Yes." He exhaled. "I respect that." He tapped the folder. "We can work something out. Let's adjust the terms." Leah smiled. This was how you played the game. And she was winning. Leah Carter sat in her corner office, the skyline of the city stretching wide beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunlight poured in, casting long shadows across her sleek desk, reflecting off the polished nameplate that now bore her title. Leah Carter, Director of Corporate Strategy, Vanguard Industries. A year ago, this had been nothing more than a fantasy. A whispered thought in the back of her mind when she had been buried in spreadsheets, grinding away at Sterling and Company, watching men like Daniel Crowe take what wasn't theirs and act as if they were untouchable. Now, Daniel was nothing more than a disgraced former executive, his name reduced to office gossip. And Leah? She had risen. She leaned back in her chair, stretching slightly before reaching for her coffee. It was still hot. The day had barely begun, but she had already cleared 3 emails, finalized a contract, and scheduled a meeting with a potential acquisition. Her phone vibrated on the desk. A news alert. She picked it up, scanning the headline. Former executive Daniel Crowe files lawsuit against Sterling and Company, claims wrongful termination. Leah smirked. Of course, he had. Men like Daniel never admitted defeat. They never acknowledged that they had built their downfall with their own hands. They clawed and grasped at whatever scraps of power they had left, convinced they could still control the narrative. She tapped the screen, scrolling through the article. Daniel was claiming that his dismissal had been unfair, that the firm had acted in bad faith. He argued that taking the Super Bowl tickets had been a strategic business decision, and that the company had exaggerated his alleged misconduct. Leah nearly laughed. He was still trying to spin it. Still trying to paint himself as the victim. But the world had already moved on. Sterling and Company had distanced themselves from him immediately. The executives who had once backed him had dropped his name from their conversations. HR had airtight documentation of his misdeeds. Daniel's battle was already lost. He just didn't know when to quit. Leah set her phone down and took another sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle on her tongue. She had won. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said. The door swung open, and Henry Lawson stepped inside, his usual confident stride carrying him across the room. He had been the one who had brought her into Vanguard, the one who had recognized her potential when Sterling had failed to. "Morning," he said, dropping a file onto her desk. "We need to go over this before the acquisition call." Leah glanced at the folder before looking back at him. "Did you see the news?" Henry smirked. "About Daniel?" "Of course." He shook his head. "Saw that one coming a mile away." Leah exhaled. "He's desperate." Desperate and out of options, Henry agreed, settling into the chair across from her desk. Sterling isn't going to give him a dime. They've already made their stance clear. The only thing he's doing is dragging out his own humiliation. Leah leaned back. "Do you think he actually believes he has a chance?" Henry snorted. "I think Daniel believes the world owes him something." Leah nodded slowly. She had seen it before. The entitlement. The inability to accept consequences. She had known from the moment he stole those Super Bowl tickets that Daniel wasn't just arrogant, he was delusional. Henry studied her. "Does it bother you?" Leah lifted a brow. "That he's still trying to fight?" Henry shrugged. "That he's still in the headlines. That he's still talking about the company you used to work for." Leah considered that. Once, maybe it would have. Back when she had still been at Sterling, still clawing for recognition in a place that didn't see her value. But now? Now, she was sitting in a position of power that Daniel could never reach again. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't bother me." Henry grinned. "Good." He tapped the file. "Because we have bigger things to focus on." Leah pulled the folder toward her, flipping it open. Yes! She had bigger things to focus on. Daniel Crowe was nothing more than a footnote now. And she? She was just getting started.